Alright, so another big day of PlayStation news stories to cover, and we might as well start off with the fact that Concord cost $400 million to make. So Colin Moriarty from Last Stand Media, he broke this story on Sacred Symbols today. I'll link down below so that you can check that out. It's available on Patreon right now. It'll go up in free feeds. And there's a tweet out there that he put out kind of breaking it down in a, quick fashion. I'll link to that as well. But he said he spoke with someone who worked on Concord, vetted the person thoroughly and made sure it was 100% legit before covering the story. And I mean, the dude runs the biggest gaming Patreon on the planet, so it's not like the motherfucker's hurting for clicks. So on Sacred Symbols today, he said that in Q1 2023, there was so much incomplete content, like just shit not being done on Concord. So Sony had to go out and outsource and contract, external partners to pretty much come in and get the game shippable by 2024. Which Sony went in and spent $200 million to get that shit cleaned up. And up until the game had went into alpha, they had already spent $200 million prior on Concord. So a grand total of $400 million spent on Concord. And here's the big add into this. That has nothing to do with the cost of purchasing the team. So throw in a few extra $100 million, I would assume, on top of that $400 million. Colin also stated on Sacred Symbols that this is the biggest game Sony has ever released in terms of budget, meaning that this was more expensive than God of War, The Last of Us 2, Horizon, and yeah, even Spider-Man 2, which we learned about last year, that cost around like $350 million. This, Concord, was more expensive to create than Spider-Man 2. Concord, a game that sold, let's be generous, and say 50,000 copies. And man, I think if we take a step back and we honestly look at this, Concord might be the biggest financial flop in the history of gaming, not just PlayStation, ever released in the history of video games. Because we know that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League took a $200 million loss, or around a $200 million loss earlier this year. And once again, if we're talking about Concord selling 50,000 copies at $40, what's that, like $2 million in total sales for a game with a budget of $400 million? Here's your return on investment, Sony. You lost $398 million, plus the cost of buying the studio. And keep in mind as well that this game was in an awful state when Sony acquired Firewalk. So you're probably logically asking yourself, why the fuck would PlayStation buy them if the game was in such an awful state? So supposedly this was purchased because conceptually, Sony was just in love with this. They thought this thing was going to be the next Star Wars. I'll read the direct quote from Colin on Sacred Symbols. It says, "It was internally referred to as the future of PlayStation with Star Wars-like potential, and a dev culture of toxic positivity halted any negative feedback." And something else that really concerns me about this is supposedly this was Herman Holst's baby. Like, this was something that Herman Holst really believed in. And Dustin Furman pointed this out as well on Sacred Symbols, that we all kind of thought that this was a Jim Ryan move. As Jim Ryan was all in on the live service plans, we was like, okay, yeah, this is probably a Jim Ryan move, and a lot of this stuff is failing consecutively. So Jim Ryan plans his exit. Herman Holst comes in to save the day. Well, if the dude that came in to save the day, if his baby was Concord, fucking A, man. That doesn't really instill me with any additional confidence in the new CEO versus the old CEO, or the future of PlayStation in general. This is just a crazy, crazy situation across the board, man. The idea of toxic positivity, the thing that bums me out about that is, like, there's a way of saying, hey, Concord is a solid enough game, like, fundamentally it plays well, yada, 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 but, like, dude, there are so many of these games vying for your time, attention, money, and people have already committed so much time, attention, money to a Fortnite or to pick your service game out there on the market. What makes Concord special? What makes Concord separate itself from the others that is going to convince people to leave the service game that they have already invested so much into and to migrate to Concord? And there's just no answer there. And so if that is considered toxic positivity, if you can't even raise that level of concern or awareness or whatever you want to call it, then that's a scary work environment to be in. And once again, we've talked about this ad nauseum about my just overall concern for PlayStation first party in general. And this definitely adds to that. Like, is the same thing true for Fair Games? Was the same thing true for fucking Destruction All-Stars? Which I guess, technically Destruction All-Stars isn't first party, but it is weird though, because then you have examples of a very critical eye towards something like The Last of Us Factions getting canceled or the Sony London team being shut down. So it's like, clearly there is a level of objectivity and looking at certain projects and going, yeah, I don't think that's gonna work. I wonder what created this air of toxic positivity around Concord in particular. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. The Last of Us Factions would have been way bigger than Concord. But yeah, just the other day, the director of Concord, Ryan Ellis, reportedly stepped down. So I would assume that Concord is probably done. I know a lot of people were speculating it'll probably be brought back to PlayStation Plus or it'll be brought back as a free-to-play game. I don't think so. And actually, Colin was talking about that a lot of assets from the game were being uploaded to ArtStation, and he speculated that might be, developers from Firewalk attempting to preserve some of those assets if, and I believe when, the game doesn't ever come back. So yeah, that's story one down in PlayStation land. We still got a couple others to go over here real quick. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, the remake is still coming, says developer Saber Interactive. This is coming from GameSpot, and obviously, like I said, I'll have everything linked down in the description. The Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake hasn't had a lot of public progress since it was announced in 2021. There were even rumors that the KOTOR reboot was no longer in development, but now the developer Saber Interactive has separated itself from Embracer Group. The company has secured a fresh round of investments that will allow it to continue to work on KOTOR and other projects. Saber Interactive announced via a press release that private equity firm ALF Capital Partners and Crestview Partners have both made a significant equity investment in the company. The amount of the investment wasn't mentioned, but the announcement did say that it will allow Saber Interactive to retire the debt it owed to Embracer Group after the buyout. It also leaves Saber Interactive with 13 different studios around the world. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic was included in the announcement as one of Saber Interactive's upcoming titles. So I'm going through the article here. It doesn't appear that there's any mention of the KOTOR remake's future as a PlayStation exclusive and for, Saber to continue that partnership with PlayStation. And I know PlayStation was not really satisfied at all with with what they saw from Aspire's work on the KOTOR remake, because Aspire was working on KOTOR remake before they were pulled off of the project after some dissatisfaction, and then Saber Interactive was assigned to pick up the development for KOTOR remake. And Aspire, who was previously owned by Saber Interactive, when Saber bought their freedom from Embracer retained Aspire. So Aspire definitely will not in any way, shape, or form be attached to that KOTOR remake project, I would assume. So maybe removing a lot of those middlemen, Embracer no longer being in the equation, Aspire no longer being in the equation, maybe that frees up a more simple working relationship between just directly from PlayStation to Saber Interactive. And I mean, I understand, okay, PlayStation supposedly wanted the game to be more cinematic, this, that, and the other, but like, when I look at Space Marine 2, I know that's definitely not as ambitious as a full-blown KOTOR remake, but that's a high-quality video game, man. That's a really, really good game. I just finished it, and Like, I think in terms of environment design, sure, it's not like the greatest character models, this, that, and the other. That definitely wouldn't be up to PlayStation's expectation, but it's like, I don't know, man. Is that really the biggest deal in the world? I get it. KOTOR Remake is something that needs to be a prestige, like, very important, high-budget product, but I mean, if you can get a good combat system and maybe throw in some Bethesda-like cutscenes, then sure, not going to be the most impressive in the world, but it'll get the job done. The writing is still there. Like, they're not going to have to really go in and create some grand, brand new story. The story has already been told for KOTOR, so just allow them to rework the combat, which they can definitely knock that out of the park. Throw in some Bethesda-like or Spiders-like cutscenes, and we'll be off to the races. Alright, and so how about we close off with a little bit more good news. Silent Hill 2, I don't even know if this is necessarily good news. Guess it depends on the perspective. Good news for PlayStation. Silent Hill 2, the remake, will be exclusive to PlayStation for 1 year. According to a new immersion trailer that dropped yesterday, Bloober Team's highly anticipated remake will become available on other formats on October 8th, 2025. So a full year as a PlayStation and PC exclusive. And I think this is just a smart move across the board for PlayStation when you're having such a weak year with your first party releases, grabbing this and grabbing a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and a Pacific Drive and a Grand Blue Fantasy and Rise of the Ronin and a Stellar Blade and all of these third party titles to fill in that gap to still make your console feel like a must own product. Like, I think these are wise moves. If you care about the health of your console ecosystem, you gotta have exclusives on that system, and they're locking them down. And Silent Hill 2, man, the previews are really, really hot on this thing. I did see something, though, where it was talking about Bloober has, like, doubled the length of the game by adding additional content to it. I don't know if I necessarily love that idea. I don't want to play a fucking 20-hour version of Silent Hill 2. Sounds depressing as shit. But yeah, do keep in mind that is a minimum of 1 year before it ends up on other platforms. And really, other platforms meaning just Xbox. I don't think this thing will come to the Switch. It might come to the Switch 2. The Switch 2 is looking pretty damn powerful. Shout out to you, Nintendo. Making some moves. I see you. But yeah, that is going to wrap up the news today in PlayStation Land. There's a bunch of other shit breaking. Yakuza, Majima off in Hawaii, Devil May Cry kicking people up in the air. Samoa Joe's gonna be in the new Yakuza game. It comes out in February. Looks sick as shit. There's some other news I forgot about that I wanted to talk about, but that's that long enough video for you here today. Talking some PlayStation news. Don't want to murky up the water too much here. But yeah, man, appreciate you guys for tuning in. Subscribe if you are new to the channel and enjoy the content. Drop it a like, all that good shit. And I shall see you good people very soon. Goodbye.